Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the 2021 Mid-South Stocker Conference. Definitely a different format than most of you would be used to. We're used to meeting in person and being either in Kentucky or Tennessee, one of the partner states, in delivering this conference. But unfortunately, need to meet like this. But as a planning committee, we did decide that we wanted to make it consistent and not skip a year of delivering the good information to you on producing stocker cattle and trying to do the best we can with production and marketing of our stocker cattle in the Mid-South. So here we are. The first thing I'd like to do is recognize our sponsors. Our sponsors have always been a really big part of what we do in planning and delivering the Mid-South Stocker Conference and supporting the work of the Mid-South Beef Stocker Association, which we also fund on occasion some grantsmanship, some grant work in universities across the two states, not just the land grants, but other universities and in partnership with universities outside the two states. So hopefully as we rebuild, thanks to our sponsors here and their support of the program and the work that the board does, then we'll be able to generate some more research that directly gives information back to you as a stocker operator so you can do better with what you do on your place there. So let me go back and say thank you to our sponsors. And as I read these off, if you want to look in the chat box, if you go ahead and open your chat box, I clicked or copied links for each of our sponsors into the chat. And so those links will take you directly to their websites and where appropriate, their websites specific to cattle production or even stocker operations if they have that option on their websites. So our sponsors are VitaFerm, Gain Smart, specifically from VitaFerm, Bluegrass Stockyards, Behringer Ingelheim Animal Health, Berkman Nutrition, Data Mars Livestock, Elanco, Micro Technologies, the Kentucky Beef Network, the Tennessee Cattlemen's Association, H&R AgriPower, Tennessee Farmers Cooperative, Multi-Men 90, CHR Hansen, UK Beef Extension, and the University of Tennessee Beef and Forage Center, or our UT Beef programs through the Department of Animal Science. So again, this is a partnership between the two states, and we've enjoyed this partnership as long as I've been here at the University of Tennessee, and it goes back quite a bit before I got here to several of the specialists that were in both states before us. One thing I also want to mention before I get into some of the other things, one of our faculty members in the Animal Science Department at UT, Dr. Liesel Schneider, who's an epidemiologist, so she does research on disease in livestock and specifically in stocker cattle. She'll be putting out a survey for stocker operators and order buyers within about a month, and just wanted to make you aware of that and put you on the lookout for that. So basically it'll be a survey about management practices that stocker operators and order buyers do with cattle that come out of the southeast. So again, that'll be a little bit later this spring. Look for that through our social media platforms. If you're on email listservs, we'll send the survey to the folks that registered here for this virtual conference as well. If you fill out that survey, then that'll put you as registered to win. I think Dr. Schneider said one of three of these VaxMate coolers, vaccine cooler boxes with the holsters there for the repeater syringes. So be on the lookout for that in about a month or so, and hopefully you'll fill that out and be registered to win one of these VaxMate coolers. I'd like to take just a second to recognize our planning committee that puts together and puts on the Mid-South Stocker Conference here from Tennessee. Myself, I can't remember if I introduced myself or not, but I'm Justin Reinhart, Extension Beef Cattle Specialist and Associate Professor in UT Animal Science. Dr. Clyde Lane, many of you know Dr. Lane, retired professor animal science that was located in Jackson. Emmett Rawls, Dr. Rawls also retired, but still serves as the treasurer for the Mid-South Beef Stocker Association. Katie Mason, who's a new, relatively new Extension Specialist here, nutritionist in UT Animal Science. Charles Hord, Executive Vice President of the Tennessee Cattlemen's Association, and Wendy Sneed, Business Development Consultant, Tennessee Department of Agriculture. And from Kentucky, certainly Jeff Lemcooler, who's taken the lead for several years on putting together this conference and delivering it once in Kentucky. He's an Associate Extension Professor at the University of Kentucky. Becky Thompson is Director of the Kentucky Beef Network there. Katie Van Valen, who's another relatively new nutrition specialist with the University of Kentucky as an Assistant Extension Professor. Kevin Laurent, Extension Associate with UK. Both Katie Van Valen and Kevin Laurent are at the Princeton station there in Western Kentucky. David Forquin, who's an Extension Agent in McLean County in Kentucky, and Philip Gunter, Assistant Professor at Western Kentucky University. So we appreciate all the work that this committee's put into putting together and delivering the Mid-South Stocker Conference to you this year. I think that most of you, having registered, will have seen the schedule. So I'm not going to read through this verbatim, but just to let you know, basically I'll be playing some videos from our gold sponsors. Then we'll have our first talk by Dr. Groves, who's a livestock veterinarian in Eldon, Missouri. Then we'll have our another round of sponsor videos, then the virtual tours of a stocker operation here in Tennessee and another stocker operation in Kentucky. And then we'll take some time to have those two operators, those two farmers on to discuss their operation with you in more detail by you asking questions in the Q&A box here, the platform that we're using. Then after that, Chris Pravat will be our last speaker on risk management tools, livestock economist from the University of Florida. And then I'll close this out with some another round of sponsor videos from our gold sponsors and just a few closing remarks to wrap us up. So with that, I don't want to take up too much of our time here with just housekeeping, but the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Jeff to introduce our first speaker is that this being a webinar platform, we don't see your video and we don't hear your audio. Basically, you just see the video of the panelists here, but I'd welcome you to use that chat box to communicate with us. And then also, if you have a question for either one of the speakers as they're going along, when we get to the Q&A time for each of their presentations, if you just type that question into the Q&A box. So if you look on, it'll be a little different if you're on a browser or the web or the desktop application, but you should see Q&A. You click that and type a question in there, and we'll, several of us on the panelists will be moderating that Q&A box, and we'll relay those questions to the speakers. So Dr. Lemcooler, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce us to Dr. Groves.
Thank you, Dr. Reinhardt. Do you want to play the first round of sponsor videos, and then we'll jump right in that?
I do, and I appreciate you reminding me of that. So let me minimize a couple of things here and reshare my screen. And this is exactly why it's a partnership, because when one of us forgets, then the other one remembers, right, Jeff?
Yes, sir.
Like the
team.
Yeah. And while I'm pulling this up, I'd like to say thanks to Ben Kreitz and Courtney Carter, both for doing a lot of work to help facilitate this. And Ben put these videos together. Just a moment. Put these videos together for us in the way that if I can figure out how to do it correctly, I'll be able to play those. All right, Jeff, will you tell me if you can see those?
We had them. You moved them to the other screen. Bring them back.
So it was on the right, correct. How about now?
There you go.
All right.
Well, again, as Dr. Reinhardt mentioned, I want to thank all of our sponsors, and we'll be playing those short commercial clips as we go through the day. Dr. Groves, at this time, if you would like to go ahead and start sharing your screen while I introduce you, that'd be great. It's our pleasure through the Mid-South Stocker Conference to work with our industry sponsors to be able to bring all of you some knowledge from across the United States that perhaps maybe we wouldn't be able to without their financial support. And certainly Dr. Groves is one of those experts that we're really fortunate to have on the program this year. Dr. Groves earned his BS at the University of Missouri and then went on and did his DVM at the University of Missouri there. And he later then went to complete the cattle production management series that the University of Nebraska offers. And he has been involved in several of these virtual online programs, sharing his knowledge about kind of managing cattle health and some of the challenges with our stocker industry that we have. And so we've invited him to share that knowledge. He's been in practice for almost 25 years now. He's owned the Livestock Veterinary Service, which is in Eldon, Missouri. Eldon, if you were to put a map up on the wall and throw a dart at it, it's pretty darn close to the middle as you can get, Dr. Groves. Probably you and I would be the only two that would know this little place called Olean, but I used to go down there to the Testicle Festival when I was in grad school.
Oh boy.
So Dr. Groves is specialized in beef cattle production medicine, focusing on large, progressive, registered, and commercial herds with an emphasis in optimizing production efficiency. One of the things that Dr. Groves does is really follow data management and helps folks interpret some of the outcomes that they see with the health protocols they implement. So with that, Dr. Groves, we want to welcome you to this year's Mid-South Stocker Conference, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks to the organizing committee for considering a practitioner from Central Missouri to talk to your group. You guys will pick up pretty quick that I'm not an academic. I'm just a regular old country vet. And thank you to the committee, and most of all, thanks to all you producers for joining us over what's pretty close to the lunch hour for most of us, I think. And I hope as I work through this that you kind of sounds like it's coming from a local vet that you're used to working with. I use pretty much language that my clients are comfortable with, and I hope you kind of find this stimulating to the way your brain works. And there's not really going to be anywhere in my presentation to take any notes, and I'm not going to talk about traditional medical stuff. I'm not going to talk about antibiotics too much or vaccines. And really, what I want you to do is just kind of sit down and listen and just kind of enjoy it. I kind of, because I've had real good mentors over my career, I take a kind of this big picture approach, and I was glad to see that subtitle for this conference, because we're going to talk about really backgrounding systems and stocker systems from this big picture approach. So thanks to you guys for having me. So more specifically, what we're going to talk about is biocontainment, or that is how to manage bugs on your farm or your cattle operation, so that you can execute your business model in a sustainable way. And so what I'm going to be alluding to, and we're not going to jump into systems thinking very much, but I'm going to throw some concepts at you that come from the world of systems thinking. So get ready for that. So there I am. I'm a 92 grad of Mizzou. As Jeff told you, he probably didn't tell you that I went back to my dad's hometown practice after school in 92. Probably the only young vet in about a 90-mile radius that was interested in working in cattle. What I would like to call the generation of veterinarians that were in that greatest generation, the World War II generation, were retiring very quickly. There was a big vacuum in the marketplace for young vets to work with beef operations. So I worked in a mixed practice for the first 10 years and did all the beef. When my dad retired, stepped out of practice, I figured out that I wasn't smart enough to do mixed practice, and I kind of specialized in beef. So that's my story. Mostly what I work with now are, and you guys, and I'm sure one or more of you kind of are into these big complex, big business models that are the stocker systems. You know, stocker and backgrounding systems tend to have complex business models. And I practiced for a long time before I understood these business models, because they didn't teach them to me in vet school. So I struggled really to help my clients because I didn't understand where they were making money. So really, most of my stocker clients in Central Missouri, you know, they buy high risk calves. We go through about a 60-day starting phase where we'll get them, we'll get their health straightened out. We'll regroup them, and we'll kind of grow them for 100 or 150 days. And we'll try to offer big lots of pretty good sized yearlings to the bigger corporate yards. So that's kind of the way would describe many of my clients that have chosen to grow or evolve over the past 20 years. I do have a lot of clients that are just seasonal or traditional backgrounders that, so I won't get too much into this, just because I actually planned for an hour, but I see I only have half hour. So we're going to rush through this a little bit and just skip some of the background. So I alluded to systems thinking. So I belong to a group called VAST, where we feel like local veterinarians have a tremendous opportunity to think in systems ways about stocker operations. So I'll give you an idea of what that is as we move along. But really, part of being a systems thinker is thinking about these complex problems very deeply. And we call that admiring the iceberg. And so I actually spend a lot of time thinking about pneumonia and feeder calves. In these, I think it's fair to say that the stocker systems have the most complex business model of any segment of the cattle industry. And I think it's fair to say that BRD is the most complex infectious disease that we know. And that's even when you consider human disease. The complexity of BRD, we're still learning about. So, and I still struggle with I think about it a lot, like I'm sure all of you guys do too. And part of thinking deeply about BRD is I try to think about the anomalies. So really, things that happen in my practice that I really can't explain, or that I can't explain it because of the way I think. I mean, I'm trained as a veterinarian to vaccinate cattle and use antibiotics. And so I have these real strong mental models about health. So I like it when I apply my tools and I get my outcome. But the real world keeps challenging me with things that don't fit my mental model. And you guys have seen this too, that calves from the same source perform differently when you send them different places. And you know, we see that happen all the time. And I think the classic example of that is a customer who buys 3 loads of calves. So we buy a lot of calves out of your guys' area, Tennessee and Kentucky both. And you know, we've had situations where we had trucks break down. So we get 2 loads to our receiving barn. I do all my veterinary magic on them, and they enter our system. A 3rd truck axle goes out, and we have to unload them along the highway, and we turn them out in somebody's pasture, and we can't get them picked back up for a month. And it's a little bit humbling when those calves that I have that get turned out in somebody's pasture have better health metrics than the ones that I actually got to put my vaccine and my antibiotics in. So I think about those anomalies and I still work at a livestock market. I used to work at too about, when I see my stocker order buyers buying loads and loads of calves, and I know that I'm going to get a chance to help them with the health of those calves, and I'm going to give them, I don't know, it's easy to spend $25 or $30 during processing. And I'll look up in the crowd and there will be a old retired client of mine who sold his cow herd. He's retired, but he just wants a load of steers to graze for the summer. And I get worried a lot, like he doesn't know what he's getting into. And then he goes ahead and buys from the same source, but he takes them home to a nice fresh farm and never needs to give anything more than a shot of penicillin or tetracycline, seems to get along fine. So I think about these anomalies and I think about what we really don't understand. And I think about stuff that really humbles me. And the thing is you guys know this, we know exponentially more about bugs, vaccines, and antibiotics, but I think you guys are aware we're no better at controlling BRD than we were 50 years ago as an industry. We're really not. And so that when I mean think deeply, that's the kind of stuff I'm thinking about. So we all learn about health risk in a certain way. And veterinarians and a lot of us are guilty. We think about the risk that's inherent to the calf. That calf is unweaned, it's commingled, it had to go through the sale barn, it got hauled on a truck, and we build up these lists of risk factors we attribute to this calf. And that has utility, but it's only part of the story. And I think that's what we've focused on a lot. And that's not what I'm going to focus on. We're going to shift gears. And we're going to start thinking about what risk is not inherent to the calf, but is inherent to the system in which we handle them. And I threw up a causal loop diagram right there. And you guys will hopefully get a little more comfortable with these by the time I get done. But what I'm saying in this diagram is that really we got a lot of pressure to manage the health risk. And what we do most of the time is we have a lot of these short-term tactics that help us manage that risk, right? Metaphylaxis right here. And actually, metaphylaxis works real good. But what I'm going to propose to you is there's a lot of long-term fundamental things we can do that actually might take years to get pulled off that we don't think about very often. And in fact, it's worse than that we get so comfortable giving antibiotics, we quit thinking about the fundamental fixes. So what I'm going to propose to you is that not just perhaps there's leverage in understanding the system. Hopefully by the time we're done, I'm going to convince you that there truly is leverage in understanding some of the dynamics of the systems these cattle live in. So real quick, let's review a little bit of what we know about disease dynamics. And I wish I wouldn't have said disease dynamics. I wish I would have just put up there. Let's review what we know about the way bugs spread in your pens of cattle. So I'm going to give you a special tool, though, to help you hopefully look at how bugs spread in cattle populations that I hope you can see it in the way you have it. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to give you a magic pair of glasses. And with this magic pair of glasses, you're going to be able to see cattle in a way you never have before. So what you will see cattle will be one of three colors. They're going to be white. White means they're naive, they're non-immune. So they haven't been exposed to any bugs. They're straight from the cow-calf farm. And they're nice, healthy, just naive cattle. If the image appears red, that calf is infected with the bug we're talking about. And it doesn't matter what bug we're talking about, but let's just say BRD bug. So white means naive. Red means that they currently are carrying the bug. We actually probably do this with COVID, but we're going to do it with BRD. And green means that they're resolved or recovered. So that is that they're no longer susceptible. Is really what that means. And we're getting ready to jump into an area of biocontainment that one of my mentors, Dr. Faulkner, has helped me with tremendously. He is part of my systems thinking team, and I know a lot of you probably know Dr. Faulkner. But what I'm going to show you is comes from some computer models that we worked on and developed that lets us model how BRD, the disease dynamic of BRD. So just like there's people at a lot of universities trying to model how COVID spreads, that Dr. Faulkner and I have been modeling how BRD spreads in pens of cattle. And the way we do this is we look at historical records and we build computer models that look like our records. So maybe Jeff, if you can just confirm you can see my
Looks good here.
Okay. So I'm going to go real quick over how the software works. So this is some modeling software where I can control a lot of variables. So I can control how many cattle are in that pen. I can control how the cattle move around that pen. And I will tell you that these cattle will move randomly. There's an algorithm that makes these cattle move randomly. There's an algorithm that says which one of them, when you pick up calves at sale barn, how many of them have been exposed and are carrying a bug just from being in the sale barn. I can set that anywhere I want. For this model, I set it at 5%. So if you bought 100 calves, I told the computer to calculate for each one of these calves a 5% probability that they picked up a bug. So if you notice, if I told the computer that, how come there's 6? Well, the reason is that it calculates it for every individual calf. So if I set it up again and again, and I say there's 5% chance, sometimes I get 3, sometimes I get 6, sometimes I get 4. But if I do this enough iterations, it will average 5. So that's how that works. So these cattle will move around. If a red calf bumps into a white calf, I can control what's the probability he will transmit the bug and how long it takes the calf to recover. So when I set this in motion and I'll hit go, you'll see those cattle moving in random fashion around the pen. And when they bump into each other, they obey all my preset rules about spreading disease. So what it allows me to do is explore and model. And I'm going to speed it up because usually we run these real fast. So this is the time it'll go fast. So it lets us model with math how disease spreads through pens. So I want you to understand that a little bit, just because we are going to use that. Are we good there, Jeff?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so hopefully that didn't confuse anybody, but the real things to remember are white, red, and green. So let's move on. And so let's think about what an average pen of calves would look like if we went to the sale barn and bought them. And let's think about what they would look like over time. So I told you the way that I set this up, that if you go buy 100 calves, that there's some probability calculations that there's a chance that if you bought high-risk calves that maybe he was exposed to coronavirus or IBR or whatever bug you want to talk about. So actually, if you had these magic glasses on when you unloaded them in the pen, you would say, I picked up 7 or however many. So that's what cattle look like when they, if you could see them, that's what they would look like. Mostly white, and there's study after study that established that high-risk cattle have very little immunity at arrival. So that's what they look like. But what I want you to think about, and think about what you know about handling your own cattle, is what do they look like as you move forward in time. So on day 7, if you could see, that's what they would look like. You would see that because of the parameters that I set on how that disease spread, that some red cattle bumped into some white cattle, and according to that probability I set, spread the disease. So we actually have an increase. We have more red cattle. We actually have some cattle that have turned green, that have went through their 96-hour course of disease and actually have recovered. So that's what I think about when I see a pen that's been at your place 7 days. And day 14, things are a little bit worse. There's less white cattle, more red cattle. Still not a very significant part of the population that is green. So day 21, and I think if most of you, when you look at your records, your peak pulls, BRD pulls, is probably somewhere between two and 3 weeks, depending on whether you use metaphylaxis or not. I think it's important to realize that when the cattle have been at your place 3 weeks, that's probably the time in which most cattle are when your disease dynamic is at the highest, if that makes sense. So the cattle have lived in the pen together for a week. We really don't have very many calves that haven't been exposed yet. I'll move forward. So cattle continue to recover. Some calves remain unexposed over time. So day 35 looks similar. So I'm going to stop at day 42 because we kind of, all our preconditioning rules, that we think there's something magic about day 45. And I always want to stop here and remind people that a lot of what we understand about 45-day weans and preconditioning programs is based on cattle that aren't necessarily high risk. So a calf that is vaccinated and weaned on the farm of origin is pretty solid at 45 days. I would actually contend, we see it in our own production data and in these models, that a lot of these calves that come in naive, a lot of those pens still have a little, quite a bit of disease dynamic going on at day 45. So, but we will continue to move forward. As you get there, you're over the hump and cattle are turning more green. Green cattle are good, right? So they're immune. So we're going to click on through this until all the red cattle go away. And actually, the way this model ran, we got to day 77. There was one real smart calf in there that tricked our model, and he's been there 77 days and he never bumped into a red calf, or if he did bump into him, he didn't get an effective dose. So the thing to keep in mind is once we get to, this is herd immunity. Once we get to herd immunity, we can keep going through days on feeds and we're at way less risk for anything because all the cattle, the immune status of the cows or the calves, the feeder cattle. So something to think about. And the reason I went through that is I wanted you to think about this disease dynamic or this pressure for disease and how it relates to how long the cattle have been there. And we don't think about that enough. And I want you to think about it in a way you haven't before, is can I use it in leverage in the way I handle my cattle? So can we develop rational tactics for how long it takes us to populate a pen and where we pen these cattle when we get them? So a little bit of data out of the big system I work with. You can see this was what 13 years ago already. So I certainly don't think I know everything now, but I knew even less here because we were still building big pens of cattle. So this bar graph represents a pen of about 240 heifers. We built big pens of heifers because feed yards like big pens. They like 250 head per pen out there. So our strategy was to build their big pens for them and sell them multi-load lots. So what this bar represents is the pull rate per group of calf. So what happened is there's a pen of cattle that had 4 groups entered it, roughly 70 heifer for each group. I don't remember, but the first group entered on 5/10. The next group 2 weeks later, next group 19 days later, and the last cohort, the last group of cattle, entered 12 days later. So the thing to remember is that the calves that went in at the beginning, and if you're interested, I mean, these cattle got Draxxin and 5-way viral and wormed and poured and implanted. So kind of the standard deal. So, we're under 20% pulls on our first group. Even cattle that went in a couple of weeks later on a Draxxin program, we thought we were still all right because we still pulled it at that second group that went in that big pen at about 20%. But the thing that became obvious is when we start tracking these is that ground load of heifers we put in there at 21 days on feed, we pulled over 80% of those cattle, and they were all on the same protocol. And and of course, this isn't good. I gave these calves Draxxin and a good viral, and so this was an important lesson for us. Is you don't have to be real smart to figure out quit doing that. And now that you have a mental picture about what pens look like as far as red, white, and green calves, I will show you real quick what most models will predict that pen looks like on day 21. And the concept here is you don't want to dump a lot of white calves in that pen because there's a lot of circulating bugs in there. And so if I can use the analogy of a fire, if you put white calves in that pen, that's like putting fuel on a fire. And so that's why even in the face of the best medicine, we can have 80% pull rates, is we can't overcome that disease challenge. So as far as days on feed and leverage, the first thing we figured out is our rule is that we only build pens in under 7 days now. We quit even this 2-week deal. So we got a week to build a pen. If we don't get to the size we want, we're going to have to change some other structure. So I hope that makes sense. I know it's not complicated immunology and stuff, but it's something real practical that actually is a very powerful tool. So I put, so the next thing is, so now that you have an image of, well, you don't want to put more calves in there, you should be thinking about, well, I should probably be very careful about where I pen cattle. So we'll do a little exercise here. And what I did is I'm going to populate some pens of cattle. And actually, let's say your operation has 6 pens and you bought 2 loads today. So you actually had four empty pens, but you see, I put cattle in that pen. See, they arrived today. So I already took that pen up. Well, I tell you what, I'm going to make the question easier. So you got another pen of cattle to pen. Where are you going to pen it? So I hope it makes sense that maybe penning the other pen of cattle in pen 1 makes more sense than penning it in pen 2. See, because if you pen them here, they're next to, although a bunch of naive cattle, they'll only get exposure from these disease cattle. If you pen them over here, you're exposing them to all these red cattle in here, which probably is dangerous, but things aren't ever that simple. So let's say here's the situation. So if you had options to place that last load in pen 1, 2, or 3, so where would you pen them? And this one's a little bit counterintuitive because for years we've been telling people don't ever pen new cattle next to these long-term cattle. But I might be suggesting you do something different. In fact, I would think pen 3 might be better than pen 1. You know why? Because if I put them in pen 3 and I shed disease into here, it hits these green cattle and it's a dead end host there. If I put them here, I shed cattle or I shed disease across the fence line, it hits that white calf and he's gonna amplify disease and give it back to me. So I would actually say if this was your choices, pen 3 would be a better choice than pen 1. But there is another option that, to do, and it's we're the way we're taught is to follow the rules. But I've worked with stocker operations long enough. I know they don't like to follow rules. So the stocker operations I work with are perfectly willing to move pens of cattle so that we have a more pen to pen that other new set of cattle that contains more pathogens, that biocontains more pathogens. So I hope that makes sense to a lot of you, that where you pen cattle, who those cattle neighbors are really affects the health of your arrival cattle. And I'll get to a concept here quickly. So let's just design ourselves a real I'm getting close to my time. I know I started a little bit late. I want to get through this concept before you shut me down. So let's put together a little yard. And what I did is I used my computer to randomly assign days on feed to each pen. So this is going to be a starting yard. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 10 pens, and I'm going to randomly decide how many days on feed there are. So starting yards look like this. They're all less than 50 days on feed usually. And what happens over time with these starting yards is, although we can make rational decisions about where to put incoming cattle, over time, our whole yard actually builds up quite a bit of disease pressure. So as you manage these yards, there's things you can do that to make sure you can pen next to cattle that came in this week should be together. If you can't go next to arrival cattle, maybe find a good green pen to go next to. But really what happens over time in these starting yards is that, and you guys will see this because I'm going to show you a couple iterations of this, is that you run out of options. And what happens in your starting yard is, although you might have reasonable options sometimes, your whole yard gets rough. And if you guys could see that slide, the slide that's currently on there, and this is where your stocker yard is different than the feedlots. And most people don't realize that, but the healthiest cattle in that yard, the healthiest pen of cattle got there today. So we teach people in populations to quarantine incoming cattle because you don't want them to give disease to your existing population. That's the way we talk about cow herds. But actually in starter yards, your rival cattle are actually your healthiest, and you need to protect them from your resident population. So in stocker yards, we talk about reverse quarantine. And if you remember that concept, you remember those nice, healthy, expensive calves I just bought. When I bring them to my place, I need to pen them in a way that protects them from the disease dynamic that goes on in starting yards. So that's the concept of reverse quarantine. So I hope that makes sense. When you work with your cattle population, there's going to be times where you make the decision maybe that you might say, I'm going to let a pen set empty. And that has tremendous value. And I want to show you real quick that if we do that same kind of scenario with a feedlot where they're feeding them 170 or 80 days, is that just visually with your magic glasses, I'll show you a couple iterations, is that feedlots are full of green cattle. And they do that by design. It actually happens just because of math, because they stay there longer. So it's actually a lot easier for feed yards to manage disease because they don't feed it naive cattle as fast. Jeff, I'll let you jump in here. Do I need to stop and let the program move on, or do you want me to cover another topic?
I think, Dr. Groves, for time's sake, maybe if we could take some questions and then we'll probably just move on, if that's all right.
Okay, nope, that's fine. Later on, if we can do more. Perfect,
that sounds good. So again, as a reminder, if you've got questions, be sure to put those into the Q&A and type those in, and we'll be sure to get those answered. So Dr. Groves, one of the things that you just showed us there is historically, we have always thought that cattle, if they're going to break within that 7 to 14 day window. But you're suggesting that is being pushed back later. Is that due to on-arrival metaphylaxis, or is that due to maybe a different way these bugs are breaking and being transmitted?
That is a very pertinent question, and it's something we see, that I see in almost all the operations I work with. I don't have a good answer for you other than saying yes, that I do think there are effects of the populations. I think there's the metaphylactic effect, and I think that so it would make sense that the bugs adapt also. So I think we're seeing some changes in the way some of these microbes behave that cause later breaks, and that's probably related to metaphylaxis. But that's an excellent question. I wish I knew a real precise answer for, but I don't.
There's another question that came in, Dr. Groves. How long does it take for a pen to be quote unquote clean or disease free after you move a group out? So should you let those pens set idle for a period of time before you move new calves in?
Right, and that's another good question. So pathogens that cause that are involved in BRD mostly live in cattle. They don't live in mud and dirt very well. They do a nice job of surviving in your water tank. So if kind of what happened here is that I got out of my lane with my clients and I quit talking about medicine. I started talking about how they pen cattle, and they've changed the way they build pens, and that was difficult for them to do. And because what I do when I do that is I affect the way they buy cattle and can push them through their operation. So for practical purposes, if we clean the water tank, we think most of the pathogens move with the cattle that left. That's not strictly true. If you can clean up the pen and spread lime, that's probably better. But for sure, you need to get that water tank flushed out and disinfected.
Great. And I think you just answered another question about what would you clean it with. And so liming the pens and being sure that we clean the waters and disinfect waters.
Right. I like cleaning water tanks with just like bleach, laundry bleach, because the chlorine will evaporate out. And although it changes the taste of the water a little bit, I don't find the cattle object to it at all. So
there's another question that came in. Would penning newly received calves with pens of cattle that are assumed immune due to being past exposure, so they've all been green now, truly be protective for the newly received calves and the other green group of calves? There are definitely other pathogens that maybe could cause new exposure for a different disease to lead to BRD, even in the green ones.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation, and that we're going to give that guy an advanced gold star, and he probably has experience doing that. But this is something that my producers do. So don't do this casually. There is risk doing this, but the way he is thinking is, so say I get a few white cattle and I don't have a good place to put them. Does it make sense to throw them in a pen of green cattle? So actually I have producers do that all the time and get away with it. It's not without risk, because if we have chance later in the program, I'll show you some probabilities of bringing in something very rare. So there's a chance, even though they're green cattle, you can introduce something that they're not immune to. Like you can introduce a multi-drug resistant Mannheimia or a PI or something. So that is something that you and your vet need to be very comfortable with and understand the risk. But it's from a biocontainment standpoint, it's actually a way to use biocontainment to improve health of high-risk cattle. So we've had groups of high-risk cattle get out in other people's mama cow herds. They do great because all those mama cows serve as dead end hosts for our bugs. But yeah, that's a good thought. That's a very good observation.
And then here's the last question that came in. Do you recommend delaying vaccine or delaying metaphylaxis treatment?
We do use delayed modified live virals on part of our cattle that we work with now. Cattle that we've tried delayed meta several times, didn't get along good with it. But yeah, those are, so you got some systems thinkers. I mean, generally people that run stocker operations are way better systems thinkers than veterinarians are. So absolutely, I encourage you to explore those possibilities with good records, and I think you will find systems where that works, especially the delayed processing. So good questions.
Excellent. Dr. Groves, that's all the questions we have at this time. I want to thank you for joining us today. And if you have additional questions, be sure to type those in the Q&A, and we'll forward those to Dr. Groves, and he can send the response back out to everybody. Dr. Reinhardt, please play the